She stood at my door holding a casserole dish. Like nothing had happened. Like 9 years hadn't passed. Like she hadn't told me, in her own kitchen, that I was dead to her. She smiled. That smile, the one I used to trust more than anything in the world, and it looked exactly the same. That's when I realized something was very wrong. Let me back up a little. Not too far. Just enough so you understand what you're walking into. My name doesn't matter. What matters is this: 9 years ago, I married the man I loved. A good man. A quiet man. A man who fixed things around the house without being asked, who remembered everyone's birthdays, who never once raised his voice at me. Not once. My family called it a betrayal. They didn't use that word exactly. They used other words. Uglier words. Words I'm not going to repeat here because they don't deserve any more air than they've already taken up. My father said I was making a mistake I couldn't undo. My mother said nothing, which, if you knew her, was somehow worse. My brother sent a text 3 days after the wedding. One line. Don't contact us. And I didn't. For 9 years, I didn't. We built a life. My husband and I bought a small house in a city far enough away that running into them at the grocery store wasn't something I had to think about. Had 2 kids. Planted a garden. Got a dog. Boring, beautiful, ordinary things. I won't pretend it didn't hurt. I cried more than I should probably admit. But grief fades when you fill the space with something real. And then she showed up. No call. No letter. No warning. Just my mother, standing on my porch with a casserole dish covered in foil, wearing the same floral blouse she used to wear on Sundays. Like she'd just driven over from around the corner. Like no time had passed at all. I stood in the doorway and I didn't move. She said, I made your favorite. Chicken and rice. I said, what are you doing here? She said she needed to talk. That things had changed. That she'd been doing a lot of thinking. I should have closed the door. I know that now. But I was raised to be polite, and old habits don't die just because people hurt you. So I let her in. I set the casserole on the counter. I made tea I didn't drink. She sat at my kitchen table and looked around at my house, at the framed photos on the wall, at my children's drawings hanging on the refrigerator, at the life I'd built without her, and she had this look on her face. I told myself it was regret. I wanted it to be regret. But it wasn't quite that. It was something else. Something I couldn't name right away. She talked for a long time. About family. About forgiveness. About how life is short and mistakes are made and how she'd missed me. She got a little teary. Just a little. Not too much. She never mentioned my husband by name. Not once in the entire conversation. I noticed that. She also asked, very gently, very casually, whether we owned our home outright, or if we still had a mortgage. She asked what my husband did for work now. She asked if I was still in touch with any of the old neighbors from when I was growing up. The questions came wrapped in small talk. But they were specific. And they were pointed. I answered some of them. Vaguely. I'd learned, in 9 years of living my own life, that information is a kind of currency. You don't hand it out freely. She left an hour later. Hugged me at the door. Said she hoped we could do this again soon. I watched her car pull away. And I stood there in the doorway for a long time. When I went back inside, my husband was in the kitchen. He'd come home while she was still there, said hello, been perfectly civil. She'd barely looked at him. He didn't say anything about it. He just asked if I was okay. I told him I wasn't sure. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the conversation. The questions she'd asked. The things she hadn't said. The way she'd looked at the photos on the wall, not with warmth, but with something closer to assessment. My sister-in-law called me the next morning. My husband's sister. She's one of the sharpest people I know. I told her what happened. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, what does she actually want? I said I didn't know yet. She said, find out before you let her back in. I told my husband I thought we should be careful. He nodded. He's always been measured like that. He didn't dismiss it, didn't overreact. He just said, okay. Let's be careful. My mother texted me that evening. Said it was so good to see me. Said she'd love to come back sometime, maybe meet the kids properly. The kids. She wanted to meet my children. I put my phone face down on the counter. And I thought about all those specific questions she'd asked. And I thought about the expression on her face when she looked around my house. Something was off. I could feel it the way you feel weather changing before the clouds arrive. Nothing I could point to. Nothing I could prove. But I know my mother. I know the difference between her genuine face and her useful face. And for the entire hour she sat in my kitchen, I had been looking at her useful face. So I stopped reacting. And I started watching. She came back the following Saturday. I had invited her. That's important. I want you to understand that. I invited her back deliberately, with my eyes open, because I needed to understand what she was actually doing before I could do anything about it. My husband knew the plan. He took the kids to his mother's house for the afternoon. The house was quiet. I made coffee. I set out the good cups, the ones we only used for guests, and I waited. She arrived 10 minutes early. That was the first thing I noted. My mother is never early. She's a woman who believes that arriving exactly on time is a form of arrogance. She was always 5 minutes late to everything. Deliberately. It was a control habit. I'd watched her do it my entire childhood. She was 10 minutes early. Which meant she wanted something badly enough to drop the habit. We sat in the living room. She was warm. Relaxed. She asked about the kids by their ages. Not their names, I realized, because I'd never told her their names. She asked about the neighborhood. About the schools nearby. Then, after about 20 minutes, she got to it. My father was sick. Not a cold. Not something minor. His kidneys were failing. He'd been on a waiting list. The medical bills were significant. My brother had already contributed what he could. But it wasn't enough. She said the family needed help. She said it carefully. Not I need money. Not give us money. She said the family needed help, as though I was still part of it. As though the last 9 years were a misunderstanding we'd all quietly agreed to move past. I kept my face neutral. I said I was sorry to hear my father was unwell. She took that as an opening. She started talking about family loyalty. About how blood doesn't disappear just because people disagree. About how she knew things had been hard, but that this was bigger than old arguments. Old arguments. That's what she called it. I nodded. I kept my hands around my coffee cup. I didn't say much. Before she left, she mentioned, almost as a footnote, that my brother had been speaking to a lawyer. That there might be a way to restructure some of the family's assets to help cover costs. That it would be easier if all the family members were accounted for. She said accounted for. I asked her what she meant by that. She smiled and said it was complicated. That the lawyer could explain it better. That she just needed to know if I was willing to be involved. I said I'd think about it. She left. I sat in my living room for a long time after that. Then I called my own lawyer. She's a woman I'd used 2 years earlier for a contract dispute at work. Sharp, direct, no patience for anything vague. I told her what my mother had said. The exact words. The asset restructuring. The lawyer my brother had apparently hired. Being accounted for. My lawyer went quiet for a moment. Then she said, don't sign anything. Don't attend any meetings. And find out who their lawyer is. I asked her why. She said, because what you're describing sounds less like estate planning and more like they're trying to establish a claim. If they can get you into a room and get your signature on something, they may be attempting to use you, your presence, your identity as a family member, to access assets or protections they wouldn't otherwise qualify for. I sat with that for a moment. Then I started thinking about all the questions my mother had asked during that first visit. Do you own the house outright? What does your husband do for work? Are you still in contact with the old neighbors? She wasn't reconnecting. She was researching. I didn't tell my husband everything right away. I needed to think clearly first, and I knew that if I told him the full picture, his instinct would be to confront it directly and immediately. That's not a flaw in him, it's one of the things I love about him. But it wasn't the right move yet. Over the next 2 weeks, I gathered information quietly. My husband's cousin knew someone who worked in property records. Completely legal, completely public. I asked for a search on my parents' address and my brother's address. What came back was interesting. My parents' house had 2 liens on it. Recent ones. Within the last 18 months. My brother's property showed a deed transfer, partial, not total, dated 8 months ago. They were in financial trouble. Real trouble. Not the kind that gets fixed by one family member pitching in. The kind that required a more complex solution. Then I found the document. I wasn't looking for it specifically. I was going through old emails, ones I hadn't opened in years, from the address I used before I moved, and there it was. Forwarded to me by mistake, apparently. My brother had meant to send it to someone else and had used an old address. It was a draft letter. From their lawyer to my brother. It outlined a plan. The language was careful. Legal. But the meaning was not complicated. The plan involved establishing that I had maintained a familial relationship with my parents. Consistent contact. Ongoing involvement. It mentioned the possibility of a family trust restructure. It used the phrase voluntary contribution agreement. It mentioned, specifically, my husband's income, which they had apparently already researched, as a relevant factor in determining contribution capacity. They had already researched my husband's income before she ever knocked on my door with that casserole dish. This wasn't a reconciliation. This was a financial extraction. They had come back into my life not because they regretted anything. Not because they missed me. Not because 9 years had softened them or changed them or made them reconsider a single thing they had said or done. They came back because they needed money. And they had decided that the most efficient way to get it was to walk back through my front door as though nothing had ever happened and hope that I was still, after all this time, the obedient daughter who believed that family loyalty was unconditional. I sat at my kitchen table with that forwarded email open on my screen. I read it 3 times. Then I saved it. Then I forwarded it to my lawyer. Then I made a copy and saved that to a separate drive. I didn't call my mother. I didn't call my brother. I didn't say a word to anyone except my lawyer and, that evening, my husband. He read the email. He was quiet for a long time. Then he looked at me and said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I want to handle it correctly." He nodded. He understood what that meant. Confronting them would have ruined everything. The first thing I did was stop being available. Not dramatically. Not in a way they would notice. I didn't stop returning calls immediately. I didn't go cold overnight. I just became slowly, quietly harder to reach. My mother texted on Tuesday. I replied on Thursday. Briefly. Warmly enough not to raise alarm. She called on Friday. I let it go to voicemail. Called back Sunday. Kept it short. Said I'd been busy with the kids. She accepted that easily. That told me something. A mother who had genuinely missed her daughter for 9 years would have pushed back a little. Would have said, "I understand, but I really want to see you." Would have asked about the children by name, which she still hadn't done, I noticed, because she still didn't know their names. She accepted the distance because the distance didn't threaten her plan. She just needed me close enough to sign something. Meanwhile, I was building. My lawyer had reviewed the forwarded email thoroughly. She confirmed what I had suspected. The plan they were constructing required my participation, specifically, my signature on what would appear to be a voluntary family contribution agreement. Once signed, that document could be used to establish an ongoing financial obligation. Depending on how it was structured, it could even affect jointly held assets. My husband's income. Our house. Our savings. Everything we had built together in 9 years. My lawyer said, "They've been thoughtful about this. This isn't something they drew up in a week. Someone has been planning this for a while." I asked her how long. She said, based on the lien dates and the deed transfer, I'd estimate they started laying the groundwork at least a year ago. Maybe longer. A year. While I was gardening and raising my children and living my quiet life, Someone in my family had been sitting at a table with a lawyer, figuring out how to use me. I asked my lawyer what our options were. She laid them out clearly. No dramatics. Just options. The first was to simply cut contact again. Block them. Disappear. It was the safest personal option, but it left the legal door open. If they were determined, they could still attempt to pull me into proceedings and argue I had re-established contact willingly. The second option was more deliberate. Document everything. Establish a clear legal record showing that contact had been reinitiated by them, not by me. Preserve all messages. Preserve the forwarded email. Get a formal cease and desist drafted, not sent yet, just prepared. And then, if they moved forward with any legal filing that named me or affected my assets in any way, respond immediately and completely. I chose the second option. We spent 2 weeks building the file. Every text from my mother was screenshot and time-stamped. Every voicemail was saved. I wrote a detailed account of both in-person visits, what was said, what was asked, in what order, and my lawyer had it notarized as a contemporaneous record. The forwarded email was authenticated. My lawyer contacted a digital forensics contact she trusted, and he confirmed the metadata, the send date, the original recipient error, the chain. It was clean. It was real. It was usable. My husband went back to his cousin and asked for a more thorough property records search, not just on my parents and brother, but on the lawyer they had hired. Public records only. Nothing illegal. Just thorough. What came back added another layer. The lawyer my brother had hired had 2 prior complaints filed against him with the state bar. Neither had resulted in disbarment, but both involved aggressive asset recovery schemes that had been challenged by opposing counsel. He specialized, apparently, in finding legal mechanisms to extract money from estranged or reluctant family members. There was even a local news article from 4 years ago. Small piece. Easy to miss. But it was there. I printed it. Added it to the file. My husband's sister, the sharp one, the one who had told me to find out what my mother actually wanted, she's a social worker. Has been for 15 years. She works with families in crisis, which means she has a detailed understanding of financial abuse, coercion, and the specific tactics people use to manipulate vulnerable relatives into legal agreements they don't fully understand. I asked her to review everything we had. She sat at our kitchen table one evening and went through the entire file. Page by page. She didn't say much while she read. When she was done, she looked up and said, "This is a textbook financial coercion setup. I've seen this exact pattern. Usually it targets elderly relatives or estranged ones. People who either can't fight back or who are desperate enough for family connection that they ignore the warning signs." She paused. "They assumed you were still that person. The one who would want to belong badly enough to not look too closely." She wasn't wrong. 9 years ago, they might have been right. I asked her if she'd be willing to write a professional summary of what she observed in the documentation, framed in the language of her field. Coercive contact patterns. Manipulation tactics. She said yes without hesitating. That went into the file too. I also contacted the state bar directly. Not to file a complaint, not yet, but to make an inquiry. I asked, in general terms, about the process for reporting an attorney involved in a scheme to coerce a family member into signing financial documents under false pretenses. The person I spoke with was careful, professional, and gave me very clear information about what would constitute a reportable offense and what documentation would be needed. I thanked them and wrote down everything they said. 3 weeks after my mother's second visit, the file was complete. Organized. Indexed. Backed up in 3 separate places, a physical copy in a fireproof box, a secure cloud folder, and a copy held by my lawyer in her office files. My mother texted me that week asking if we could meet again. She said she had some paperwork she wanted to show me. That it was straightforward. That it wouldn't take long. Paperwork. There it was. I texted back and said that sounded fine. That I was free the following Saturday. That she should come by in the afternoon. She replied within 4 minutes. Perfect. See you then. I showed the exchange to my lawyer. She said, good. When she arrives with documents, do not touch them. Do not read them in her presence. Do not sign anything. If she pressures you, you tell her you want your lawyer to review everything first. If she becomes aggressive, you have the right to ask her to leave. I said I understood. She said, I'll be available by phone the entire afternoon. You call me the moment anything changes. I said I would. That Friday night, I sat with my husband on the back porch after the kids were in bed. We didn't talk much. The garden was quiet. The dog was asleep by the door. He reached over and held my hand. He said, you don't have to be the one to do this. I said, yes I do. Not out of anger. Not out of a need to prove something. But because this was my family. My history. My name on whatever they were trying to build. And if it was going to be dismantled, I wanted to be the one holding the file when it happened. Saturday morning, I got up early. Made breakfast. Got the kids ready and drove them to my mother-in-law's house. She hugged me at the door and said, you've got this. I drove home. I made tea. I sat in the living room and I waited. At exactly 2 in the afternoon, a car pulled into my driveway. My mother got out. My brother got out. And a man I didn't recognize, carrying a leather briefcase, got out behind them. I watched them walk up the path from the window. I let out a slow breath. I picked up my phone and sent my lawyer one word. Now. They thought it was just another day. It wasn't. I opened the door before they knocked. That was deliberate. I wanted them to know, from the very first second, that I was not surprised. That I had been expecting them. All 3 of them. My mother smiled. My brother looked at the ground briefly, then recovered. The man with the briefcase, the lawyer, introduced himself with a firm handshake and a practiced smile. He said he was there to help facilitate a family conversation. I said, come in. I led them to the living room. I had arranged the seating carefully the night before. The sofa on one side. A single chair on the other, mine. A clear, deliberate separation. Not aggressive. Just clear. They Saturday. I Saturday. I did not offer coffee. My mother looked around the room the way she always did, assessing. My brother had his hands folded in his lap. The lawyer set his briefcase on the floor and clicked it open with the ease of someone who had done this many times before. He began talking. He had a soft, reasonable voice. The kind designed to make complicated things sound simple. He explained that the family was going through a difficult period. That my father's medical situation had created financial strain. That the family had been working with him to find a fair and organized solution. That the solution involved a voluntary family contribution structure, completely legal, completely standard, he said, and that my participation would be entirely optional. He used the word optional twice. He slid a document across the coffee table toward me. I looked at it. I did not touch it. He said, take your time. It's straightforward. I said, I'm sure it is. My mother leaned forward slightly. She said, we just want this to be a fresh start for all of us. For the kids to know their grandparents. For us to be a family again. She said it softly. She meant for it to land like an olive branch. I said, I appreciate you coming. Then I reached to the side table next to my chair, where I had placed a folder the night before, and I set it on the coffee table. I said, before we go any further, I want to share something. The lawyer's expression didn't change. He was good at that. My brother looked at the folder. My mother's eyes moved to it and then back to my face. I said, about 3 weeks ago, I received an email by mistake. It was meant for someone else. It was a draft communication from your office. I looked at the lawyer, to my brother. It outlined this meeting. The document. The contribution structure. And specifically, the intended use of my husband's income as a factor in determining the amount. Silence. Not dramatic silence. Just the ordinary, terrible silence of a room where something has been named that was never supposed to be named. My mother opened her mouth. I said, gently, please let me finish. She closed it. I said I had shared the email with my own attorney, who had reviewed it fully. I said I had documented every contact initiated since my mother's first visit, the questions she had asked, the progression of conversations, the specific timing of when paperwork was introduced. I said my attorney had also made a formal inquiry with the State Bar regarding the circumstances under which an attorney facilitating coercive contact with an estranged family member could face a reportable complaint. I was not raising my voice. I was not angry, at least not in any way that showed. I was just talking. Calmly. With a folder on the table. The lawyer's practiced ease had shifted into something more careful. He said, "I want to be clear that nothing here was intended to be coercive." I said, "I understand that's your position." I opened the folder. Inside were printed copies of the email. The property lien records. The deed transfer. The news article about prior bar complaints. My sister-in-law's professional summary. The notarized account of both visits. And a letter from my attorney, addressed to the lawyer by name, outlining our position and formally requesting that all contact with me and my husband cease immediately, and that my name be removed from any legal filings, documents, or proceedings related to my family's financial situation. I slid it across the table. I said, "My attorney is available by phone right now if you'd like to speak with her directly." The lawyer picked up the letter. He read it. He took his time. His face gave very little away, but his jaw had tightened in a way he probably wasn't aware of. My brother was staring at the table. My mother was looking at me. Not with anger. Not with the cold dismissal I remembered from 9 years ago. With something I hadn't expected. Recognition. Like she was seeing me, actually seeing me, for the first time in a long time. Maybe for the first time ever. She said, quietly, "I didn't think you'd." She stopped herself. I said, "You didn't think I'd what?" She didn't answer. The lawyer cleared his throat. He said he would need to consult with his client before responding to the letter. He said he wanted to assure me that there had been no intent to cause harm. He used careful, measured language, the language of someone who had just realized that the room he walked into was not the room he had prepared for. I said, "That's fine. My attorney's contact information is on the letter." He closed his briefcase. He stood. He said something brief and professional to my brother. My brother nodded without looking up. I walked them to the door. All three of them stepped out onto the porch. The afternoon was bright and ordinary. Birds somewhere in the garden. A neighbor's car passing slowly on the street. My mother paused at the top of the porch steps. She turned and looked at me. I thought she might say something significant. Something that would reframe the last 9 years, or at least acknowledge them. I had spent a long time, more time than I would ever admit, imagining what that might sound like. She said, "You look well." I said, "I am." She nodded once. Then she walked to the car. I stood in the doorway and watched the car reverse out of the driveway and disappear down the street. Then I went inside. I sat down at the kitchen table. I called my lawyer. Told her how it had gone. She said I'd handled it exactly right. She said she'd follow up with the other attorney by end of day and that we should expect either a formal withdrawal or a response within the week. It was a withdrawal. 4 days later, a brief letter arrived from the lawyer's office. It stated that my name had been removed from all related documentation. That no further contact would be initiated. That the family's legal proceedings would continue without my involvement. No apology. No explanation. Just removal. Which, after everything, was exactly what I had asked for. My brother never contacted me. My mother sent one text, 2 weeks later. It said, "I hope the children are well." I read it. I set my phone down. I thought about it for a day. Then I replied, "They are. Thank you." That was the end of it. I don't feel triumphant about any of this. I want to be clear about that. There's no version of this story where I walk away feeling like I won something worth winning. What I won was the right to be left alone. The right to protect what my husband and I built. The right to not be used by people who looked at my life and saw a resource instead of a daughter. That's not a victory worth celebrating. It's just a door that needed to close properly. My children don't know their maternal grandparents. That's a sadness I carry quietly. My husband knows I carry it, and he doesn't try to fix it, because it can't be fixed. Some things just have to be held. But when I sit on the back porch in the evening and watch my kids chase the dog through the garden, and my husband brings out 2 cups of tea without being asked and sits beside me without needing to say anything, I know what's real. I know what was worth protecting. I know I made the right choice, 9 years ago and again 3 weeks ago, when I opened that door and let my mother walk into a room she wasn't prepared for. I don't need her to understand that. I don't need anyone to. That night, everything was quiet. If this story stayed with you, if you watched all the way to the end, you already know why. Share it with someone who needed to hear it. And if you have a story of your own, leave it in the comments. You don't have to explain yourself. Just know that someone will read it. Thank you for watching.